Hello, and welcome to a special Chicago Tonight Voices community conversation featuring the documentary Facing Suicide. My name is Tim Russell, Vice President, Community Engagement and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for WTTW and WFMT, and our purpose is to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. Facing Suicide is a new documentary and is part of an ambitious national initiative led by Twin Cities PBS, and gives insight into one of the most urgent health crises in the country. Facing Suicide will premiere on all WTTW platforms on tomorrow, Tuesday, September 13th at 9 p.m. This new film explores powerful stories of those impacted by suicide, one of America's most urgent health crises, and takes viewers to the front lines of research and scientists who work in leading to better prevention and treatment. Today, you'll have an opportunity to preview selections from the film, and Paris Schutz, co-anchor of WTTW's Chicago Tonight, will moderate today's conversation. Now, before we get things going, I'd like to extend a very special thanks to the national funders and partners of Facing Suicide. In addition, I would like to thank our supporters of WTTW's presentation of Facing Suicide, which helps us fulfill our purpose to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. And finally, thank you to our supporters of WTTW's Black and Latino Voices, who you can see listed here. Before we begin, if you or someone you know are in crisis or experiencing thoughts of suicide, 988 is now active across the United States. The new shorter phone number will make it easier for people to remember and access mental health crisis services. Please note, the previous 1-800-273-TALK number will continue to be functional indefinitely. Please call or text 988 or chat www.988lifeline.org. They're here for you and available 24/7. Now, let's watch the trailer for Facing Suicide, which premieres on all WTTW platforms on Tuesday, September 13th at 9 p.m.
When you're depressed, man, the only thing you can think about is yourself, what's eating you up inside.
I've been faced with depression, and without the help from my two best friends, I wouldn't be standing in front of you here today.
The way that you start a contagion of hope is to start spreading stories of recovery.
Finding a way to connect with them keeps them alive.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Chicago Tonight, WTTW Voices community conversation here. I'm making sure that you can all hear me and that I'm not on mute. I believe that I'm coming through here. So I'm Paris Schutz, by the way. September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. It's a time to raise awareness of this stigmatized, often taboo topic. The purpose of this month is to shift public perception and ensure that individuals, friends, and families have access to the resources that they need to discuss suicide prevention and to seek help. And as everyone here knows, suicide is an urgent health crisis, and it touches far too many Americans each year. So this new documentary, Facing Suicide, an impact campaign from Twin Cities PBS, explores the stories of those impacted by suicide, revealing the steps that friends, family, and community members can take to help those at risk. And alongside some of these stories are the stories of prominent researchers uncovering the complex factors that can lead to suicide with insights for better prevention and treatment. And so together, all of this, the hope is it provides a message for hope and healing. And so this afternoon, we'll be discussing the documentary and the issue more broadly. And you're all, the viewers here, you're all in listen-only mode, but that does not mean you can't be part of this conversation. We do want to hear from you, so please chime in on the chat function. So send any of your questions to me on the chat function, and we're going to leave some time near the end of this hour to get to all of the questions that you all have here. So I want to start by introducing our guests and thanking them for spending this Monday afternoon with us. First is Michael Rosenfeld, the VP of National Productions at TPT Twin Cities PBS, and the producer of this film. Marilyn Rodriguez, bilingual psychotherapist, Dr. Marilyn Rodriguez, bilingual psychotherapist at Latinx Talk Therapy. Dr. Sean Joe, who is the Benjamin E. Youngdahl Professor of Social Development at Washington University in St. Louis. And you see Dr. Joe featured in this film. And then Dr. Munther Barakat, Director of Behavioral Health Therapy at Advocate Aurora Medical Center. So you just saw the preview here. Welcome to all of our panelists. Hello, everybody's looking great. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're gonna start our discussion watching one clip from the film. So let's take a look at it.
Caregivers and scientists seek to stop preventable tragedies that strike every day. Others focus on public health strategies that keep people from ever considering suicide to begin with. Everyone engaged in the fight agrees about the importance of one thing: seeing the signs of a suicide before it occurs.
The biggest sign to look out for is if they're just not themselves. I mean, if you can definitely tell that, they're acting different, they're not talking as much, they're kind of isolating themselves.
That means now they're really in their rooms, right? They're really locking themselves off. All the things that used to bring them joy don't bring them the same level of joy. And at all times, they might begin to express, and this is important, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Anybody talking about a sense of being hopeless, like there's no hope anymore for them, there's no future for them, or that there's no purpose for them to be alive, no reason for them. They don't have anything left to contribute to their family, to their friends, to society, or to the world.
All right, good hit, yeah.
The community has a role to play in preventing suicide. Teachers have eyes on our youth for more hours of the day than probably most other adults. Parents know their kids and their kids' patterns of behavior, what makes them tick. Coaches are around our kids. You can come around that individual with greater attention to what they may be going through and to remind them that they are loved, they're worthy. There is help, there's a way through any challenge.
So Michael Rosenfeld, as we mentioned, you are the producer of this film. You put this together over at Twin Cities Public Television. This is a massive topic, and there's so many directions you could go with this. So I was wondering if you could explain to us your approach to putting this together and what you wanted to accomplish with this film.
Sure. And thank you for that question. And also thank you very much for hosting this event and helping to put some light on this topic, which is so important. And while I'm at it, I also want to say a special thanks to Dr. Joe for being in our film. We've never met, but I feel like I know you from seeing the film so many times, so thank you. I was the executive producer of the film. The producer is a Washington, D.C. based producer named James Barrett, who brought the film to us 3 years ago. So it took quite a while to get this going. And it was pretty, when James, the producer, came to me with this idea, it just was so clear from the outset that this was a story that needed to be told. It just seemed to me then, and I feel it even more strongly now, that it's one of those topics that just seems, if you're outside the field of suicide prevention, if you're just, someone who's living his life or her life, it just seems like one of those topics that's incomprehensible and just hard to get a purchase on. And one of the things we wanted to do was to give people a basic understanding of this phenomenon, what drives it, what the risk factors are, and really most important of all, how people can be helped. And one of the messages that I think comes through in the film is that, of course, therapists, medical practitioners, and other professionals play a crucial role in helping folks who are having this sort of issue. But you don't have to be a doctor to help someone. There's a role for all of us if we understand some of the basic ways to help people in our own lives with friends and family. And I hope that that's something that comes through in the film as well.
Right. So many subjects in your film talk about how they were saved because they did reach out to peers or to family. And Dr. Joe, as Michael mentioned, you are featured in this film, giving your expertise. And we saw you in that first clip saying, one of the telltale signs is when someone just says, I'm fine, and others who are concerned keep asking them. I was just wondering if you could expand on that. Why is that their go-to?
Well, just a little context is that when you see people behaving differently, and then you, as family members, as peers, as friends, and you want to say, well, something seems different, and they would just say, I'm fine. And trying to one, not draw more attention to themselves, also trying to, again, making sure that the things that they're struggling with, they might feel some level of shame around it and guilt around it for even thinking about taking their own life. But it's one of the things I see sometimes, that you'll get this reaction from particularly young people that say, well, no, there's nothing wrong, I'm fine, while they're in severe pain and struggling quite a bit. So I just wanted the audience to know that sometimes they might hear that, and some of us might, for a variety of reasons, might be comfortable in saying, okay, now I can move on to something else. You're not doing anything bad, but sometimes, we say we're going to take them at face value. Or they might even feel a little bit uncomfortable because they're like, well, I don't think you're fine, but if I keep pushing, you might push me away. So again, you might hear this, and I just wanted people to know that they might hear that.
So it's an important telltale sign. And Dr. Marilyn Rodriguez, you work a lot with the Latinx community, a lot of times with immigrants or undocumented immigrants. So when you see the stories in this film, is that what you see in your practice? Do you see some of these same warning signs? Do you see this kind of same stigma?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. Yeah, of course. Even though it's a different population, the symptoms, they are really similar all across. And one thing to know is that each individual, they'll experience individual symptoms that may differ, but most of the comments are the ones that are highlighted in the film, right? The feelings of hopelessness, the feelings of loneliness, the disengagement. And so it pretty much does look really similar across different populations.
And Dr. Munther Barakat, you work over at Advocate Aurora Health Center. Can you just talk about some of the strategies that you've worked on to help address and prevent suicidal thoughts in patients?
Right, it's a great question. I first want to thank everybody here for coming here today to discuss it, because one of the biggest risk factors is a societal risk factor of stigma associated with getting help. And a big piece of that is talking about it and putting it out there. And at Advocate Aurora, we're really focused on ensuring that we're properly assessing all of our patients that are coming in. We do have a behavioral health service line that obviously we're assessing mental health in that service line, but as a larger organization, we have medical centers all over Illinois and Wisconsin. So we know that individuals who have suicidal ideations and may commit suicide oftentimes have contact with a non-behavioral health clinician. So what we want to do is we want to ensure that we're assessing everybody that comes through our facility to ask those questions and to really ensure that they're not falling through the cracks, that we're getting them the help that we need.
And Michael, I want to go back to you and I'll have anyone else jump in on this if they want to talk about it, but there's just a fascinating bit of science in here where you're interviewing a doctor and they're talking about the two different regions of the brain here, I think in the frontal lobe, and in activity that pertains to suicidal thoughts in one region and depression in the other region. Can you just explain some of those findings?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would just say that one of the things that we learned in tackling this topic, which is a huge topic, it goes in so many different directions, is that we actually know quite a bit about the phenomenon of suicide. I think there's generally a sense that folks have that it's kind of a mystery. We don't know that much about it. but there is there's a community, a very dedicated community of suicide researchers in the hard sciences, in the medical sciences, in the social sciences, who have been, doggedly illuminating what we actually know. And when it comes to neuroscience, I think it's still early days, but the work that you're referring to it's a scientist at Columbia University named John Mann, who is working on neurotransmitters, which are molecules in the brain that transmit messages and the role that they play. And I'll say that it's really complicated stuff. It took us weeks to figure out how to explain it. But one of the interesting findings was that this particular neurotransmitter doesn't work right in people with depression or people who have suicidal ideation. At first, scientists thought there was maybe too little of this neurotransmitter, but John Mann and his colleagues discovered that, in fact, there's too much of it and it just doesn't work right. So what he found was that in the part of the brain where this is associated with depression, if this is going on in that region only, it doesn't impact the risk of suicide. If it's in the part of the brain that's correlated with suicidal ideation, yes, people are thinking about suicide, but they're not often attempting suicide. When this is going on in both parts of the brain, then that really increases the risk of suicide.
Yeah, it's fascinating research. And Dr. Joe and Dr. Barakat, I saw you kind of nodding your head a little bit. I was wondering if you wanted to add any just about some of this neuroscience that's discovered this activity in different regions of the brain.
So if you don't, so as we're thinking about this, you have to understand we're trying to figure out how to identify those who are at risk. And again, suicide, although it's very complex because you have the interaction with your environment, your family, society, and then you have what might be happening within your body, physiologically, chemically, right? So a lot of what we've been doing right now is really beginning to say, well, we know there's some association when we see this. So if a part of your brain lights up, we're saying something's happening there, but we're not quite sure of the causative nature of it because it would never just be serotonin or one chemical in your brain. It's interaction between your body and your lived experience, right? Where someone is coming to the point of saying, you know what, my death is of more value to me than my life. So I just wanted to put the biological just in context.
I think the environmental factors will
basically it's going to be the largest.
In my
view, it's going to be the largest, more important part of this, because not everyone who's depressed go on to consider suicide. In fact, majority of them do not, or not everyone who's anxious go on to want to take their life. But everyone who perceive that that their life is not worth living, or who perceive that level of intolerable pain because how they're experiencing life, how they, whether it's those who are acting to cause them stress, or whether or not there is some mental illness that's causing them to perceive, and experience life in that way, is going to be critically important. But yeah, these things help us to kind of get a sense of what some of the indicators are that we might be able to assess someone if they can't express it. So that's why I think the biological is important. But no, I think a larger part of most health outcomes is the social determinants and how people experience life.
Paris, can I just add to that? Sure. Because I think that's a real a key message in the film. In fact, Christine Moutier, who you saw in the trailer, she says she has a great statement in the film where she says it's never a single factor. It's always a combination of factors. Some may be physiological or inherited, but lived experience plays a really, really important role. And the factors may differ from person to person. And so it's never possible to say it's, someone died by suicide for a particular reason. It's always a constellation of reasons, which is part of what makes this so complicated to figure out. But I think part of the good news is that the techniques that some of the folks on the panel and many others have been developing, they work pretty broadly, as I understand it. Please correct me if I'm wrong. but there are things that can be done to help people, and that's such an important message. Asking the question, which we touched on earlier, is one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a myth that if you ask someone, are you thinking about killing yourself, that you will plant an idea. And that has been shown to be just not the case. In fact, by opening that door and giving people a chance to talk about it, that can sometimes be opening a door to really helping someone through this crisis.
So people don't need to avoid that question. Yeah, Dr. Barakat, I think you want to jump in.
Yeah, I just want to add, I mean, we brought up some excellent points with regards to risk factors, and it all boils down to how are we assessing suicide risk? And we're ensuring that we're asking questions around and we're collecting data and information around those risk factors, whether they be individual risk factors, relationship risk factors, community risk factors, or societal. And we know that some individuals may have higher risk of suicide based to their exposure in the environment. So we're collecting all this information. We're ensuring we're using evidence-based tools to assess suicide. And this increases the likelihood that we'll catch individuals and get them the help that they need by collecting this information. So I welcome all of the research and the data that we're collecting with regards to risk factors, because that's really improving the quality of how we're assessing patients and those who are in need.
All right, Marilyn Rodriguez, I want to bring you back here because you work on what's called culturally informed mental health awareness. So can you explain that practice for us?
Yeah, of course. And so as everybody said, it's important to recognize the multiple risk factors that come together, right? That is not just one issue that causes suicide. And this is where culture plays a role as well, making sure that the services and the mental health support that is provided to individuals is culturally competent. What does that mean? For us, primarily at Latinx Talk Therapy, we work on destigmatizing mental health in general within the Latinx community. And so recognizing that for migrant populations, it is different risk factors that come into play that have to do with acculturation, transnational trauma, and making sure that in our services, we are providing adequate care, which may be, language, addressing language barriers, location barriers. If people aren't able to get to us, we provide telehealth appointments, making sure that the services are not only affordable, but accessible to the different communities.
And you work a lot with undocumented communities. Can you just talk about the climate? That we're in, some of the life experiences that they're facing. Are these major risk factors for depression and suicide, even in the Latinx community?
Yeah, of course. As you mentioned, right, the political climate has a lot to do with the amount of stress, the inequalities, and just the despair that a lot of migrant communities and Latinx communities face. And so in destigmatizing mental health, it's important to acknowledge that despair is normal. It's important to address the systemic, transnational, and generational traumatic experiences that communities of color and all have faced.
All right, well, let's watch another clip from the film, and this is pertaining to folks reaching out for help. So let's take a look at this.
So when I was growing up in Gastonia, one of my classmates, Lisa, never will forget her, I had on some shoes that had holes in them. And I had put some cardboard in it to keep the dirt out. Well, when you walk, your whole shoe comes up and people can see it. So Lisa asked me to walk in front of her so she could make fun of my shoes. And I could hear the kids laughing in the background. And that really, really hurt me, because it hurt me for the fact that I had to go to school like that. And it hurt me because I felt like my mom was doing the best that she could. So Lisa set the tone for my reason why I love shoes. And I didn't even realize that. It took me years to kind of realize why I love shoes so much. These are really nice because they're kind of like heels, but they're not. And they're very comfortable. They got the little sparkly stuff across the foot. I actually have these in 2 colors. This pair is it's kind of self-explanatory. And thank God they were marked down. The color green for mental health stands for hope. So of course I had to have a pair of shoes with green. I think probably the onset of depression maybe started when I was around 15, 16. My first suicide attempt was when I lived in Savannah. My mom was, it was difficult living with my mom. I mean, I lived with her, but then I moved up the street from her. And first off, I didn't even want to live in Savannah. When I moved down there, I hated it. So altogether, probably about 2 times where I actually had a plan and 2 times where I seriously thought about this would be the best way for me. Well, I guess if I can have people to visualize the pain, I've had wisdom teeth removed, abscessed tooth, open heart surgery, hysterectomy, knee surgery. You could put all the pain together from all my surgeries that I've had growing up and combine them together, and it would not touch the pain that I felt on February 14th, 1995. I had just had it. And my mind was telling me, you know, if you just take these pills, if you just go to sleep, everything will be over with. Your son will be better off, nobody's going to care, and that's how I felt. But before I did that, I said, man, you know, somebody's got to know about my pain. And I called my Aunt Spanky. We grew up 3 years apart, always been close. And I simply said, you can have my shoes. That's all I told her. Hey, Spanky. Hey, I didn't know you got your yard done, your thing done like that. I knew you were going to change. I knew you were going to change stuff.
During the course of the conversation, she said, you can have my shoes. That was an instant indication that there was something wrong, because we are serious about shoes.
There's so much to unpack from that clip, and I want to get to a number of things. But first, Dr. Joe, the fact that she reached out to, you know, in her life, the person that was the closest, her best friend, her aunt. How, I don't know if we have data on this, how often does someone struggling so severely with suicide ideation reach out and actually tell someone so that people actually know this is happening versus they just keep it to themselves and they don't want anyone to know? And is that, I mean, how big a determining factor is this for folks getting help and recovering from this, the fact that they actually reached out to someone and said something?
Well, we know your social connections in your life just matter so much, you know, and it often saves the lives of individuals, even to people they don't know. There's a story of a gentleman, Kevin Hines, who jumped off the Golden State Bridge. He might be in the documentary as well. I can't remember. And he just said, you know, he was going, and on his way there, he said, you know, if he had made anybody tried to make a meaningful connection to him, you know, it would have changed his outlook in terms of whether or not he jumped or not. What I saw in this clip was really interesting for several reasons. One, she never really told what her pain was, but she wanted to share that with someone. What she said is, like, as we say, as a warning sign, she was willing to give away something that meant so much to her, but she told it to someone whom recognized that because they both share that. And how important it is to have that outlook. And again, sometimes people will leave notes, but it's not often that they will leave a note to kind of explain or to express themselves. Mm-hmm. But again, one of the things that saved her life is that she felt the need that I just can't disappear. It's important somebody know why. And I'm going to extrapolate a little bit because I do believe, and she's, you know, a woman of African descent, there's going to be some level of stigma and guilt related to, you know, she has a child, she has reasons for living, and she wanted to be able to explain, because in the family, culturally, somebody's going to have to explain why she, you know, if she's gone, why she took her life. Mm. So I think she took a step to say she knew this, and she wanted someone who knew her closely, and that conversation led to her finding enough to hold on and get through that crisis. Because suicide, again, as the clinicians would say, it happens in crisis in moments, 5, 10, 15 minutes. It might happen a lot, but it's not 3 hours, 15 days. It cycles, and it's acute moments of that breaking point. So those are a few things, but again, there's some stigma that she was trying to address in being able to express and wanted someone to know why she did this.
Right. And it might have been the thing that saved her life. Dr. Barakat, she also discusses the pain. I mean, you know, from a hysterectomy and knee surgery or whatever, put all that together and it didn't equal the pain of suicide ideation. Can you just describe what that kind of pain is like from patients that you see?
Sure. Dr. Joe really did an excellent job summarizing that acute moment, because we know that when individuals have suicidal ideations and they're contemplating following through with a plan, it is an acute moment that they need to get through. And that moment is the moment where they're strongly considering following through with the act, and it is their depressive symptoms are at the highest at that moment, and their hopelessness is at the highest that moment, and the pain is so overwhelming. That's what makes them follow through with it. So a lot of the tools that we build for patients is built to help them get through that acute stage, whether it be developing a safety plan. And we know that developing relationships and having a sense of belonging is a protective factor for patients. And she felt connected to this individual where she called this individual. And interestingly enough, that is a component of a safety plan, is having a process where you try to connect with people in your environment when you're having that acute, intense moment and just trying to survive and get through that moment. That really is interesting how it kind of falls into the whole process of how we try to get patients to protect themselves.
So certainly a scary moment. Marilyn Rodriguez, how do you get the patients that you see through moments like that?
Yeah, sure. In, therapy services, I think one of the most important steps is bringing awareness and education on what therapy is like, what a therapeutic relationship is like, and how it can support you. There is so much, again, stigma within the mental health field, and really helping somebody understand what you can get out of a therapeutic relationship, how you can, not only better understand your experiences and your emotions, but develop those coping skills that maybe you aren't able to access or recognize on your own. And so really it's about providing that education, bringing education on how you can access therapy services and what the purpose of being in a therapeutic relationship is really like.
And Michael, this woman's story was so interesting in the film. And in this film, there's such a diversity, like geographic, demographic, of folks that you're really kind of telling the personal story of. You've got a young man on a Native American reservation in Montana. You've got farmers talking about the depression and suicide in the farming community. Is there anything you learned from speaking to just such a variety of folks, or watching these stories from such a variety of folks that surprised you or that stood out?
Oh my gosh, so much surprised us and so much stood out. I mean, we did go to farm country in Iowa and North Dakota, I think, because we just felt that was so important. Suicide affects every demographic and every community in this country, but the largest number of suicides occurs among middle-aged and older white men, and a lot of those men are in agricultural communities. So we thought that was very important. One of the things that really struck me is, of course, there's so many differences between individuals and also different things going on culturally in different communities, but there were some universals that we saw, things that just kept coming up again and again, and one is the way people can get through a suicidal crisis, often with help, and the number of people that we met along the way and who we profiled in the film, who then go on to help other people. And in fact, Fonda, the woman whose story we just saw, she is now a very engaged suicide prevention activist. So is the young man you mentioned on the Flathead Indian Reservation in Montana. It's just something we saw consistently. And I think it's a very uplifting thing to know about. And it's one of the things that gives you hope. One of the things that we really were a little concerned about when we started on this film is it's such a difficult topic, and it's full of tragedy. It's just inherent in the subject matter. Something like 45,000 Americans die by suicide every year. Which is, it's hard to absorb that. It's such a terrible thing. On the other hand, we wanted to give people some sense of hope, some sense that people can be helped, and some sense that, as you mentioned stigma, some sense that it's important to talk about this, because that's one way that people can be helped.
And Dr. Joe, you kind of brought this up with Fonda's story a little bit. You felt that maybe she's reaching out because she feels some of the stigma in the African-American community, and your research is working. You've done a lot of research specifically with men and boys. What have you learned specific to the African-American community, whether it be stigma, whether it be treatment, and whether it be just the rates of suicidal ideation?
Yeah, no, thank you. There's a couple of things I can highlight real quickly. One, when it comes to Black Americans, you're talking primarily something that impacts the young. So as it was mentioned, when you look at U.S. as a whole, white males, middle age account for most of those deaths. But when you look at the Black American community, it's males who account for 60 to 80+% of those deaths, and most of them are under the age 35. So the highest risk groups for us are those under 35, which is very different than for whites, which is older, middle-aged and older white Americans. So for us, for Black Americans, they're losing a younger generation, those who are barely into their fourth decade of life, right? Or second or third, making that decision that life is too intolerable to bear and death is better off. So that's very different. Some of the risk factors are going to be nuanced. And again, it's going to be looking at what drives males and what methods do they use, because the method also matters. So you could be in crisis and not next to a method that can actually end your life, that's requiring few skills to use, like a gun, all right? But we're also now beginning to understand that social identity and how Blacks perceive themselves is beginning to matter, and getting some insight into from whom does that matter? Those who have low connection to their cultural heritage, or those who don't feel that being Black is a distinguishing factor. Again, they're high risk for depression, anxiety. And that's the other point, I'll leave it here. We're finding that it's not just through a depressive lens. For Blacks, it's also anxiety. That's is one of the major lenses that puts them at risk. So if they have high levels of anxiety, particularly if it's a disorder level, then they're at risk just as much as if they have depression. So for us, we don't just talk about just being depressed, we talk about being anxious. And then we say, well, what do being Black and male would make you anxious in American context? And I think there's a lot we can talk about there.
Certainly. We talk about the rates in different communities. According to the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, since 2011, the age-adjusted suicide death rate has increased for all races and ethnicities in the U.S. And the film kind of gets into Native Americans as well. They've experienced some of the highest rates, particularly. So let's take a look at a clip talking about that.
In the winter of 2018, Greg, Dar, and the Arley Warriors should have been on top of the world. They were expected to be state champions again, but a lot more was riding on the title than just a trophy. The suicides on the reservation numbered in the teens, soon to reach 20. Watching the Warriors play gave the community a few hours of relief from the ordeal outside the gym. For the players, it raised the stakes even higher.
Their success started to excel at such a fast rate. It created a lot of pressure on them. It was hard on those boys. I definitely know that they got to where they didn't want to let anybody down.
I remember the Arley Warriors right in the beginning of those suicides, and we're trying to encourage and be supportive of the basketball team and support them. And it was like we got to just step out of that, all that sadness, and just be in a place that we could just do what we love, and that's watch basketball, watch our Indian kids play basketball.
The Arley Warriors had become a light against the darkness that was overtaking the reservation.
Michael, you touched on this a little bit, but specifically, what happened at that reservation? There were a rash of suicides, and can you extrapolate this to the Native American community in general? I mean, are the rates super high in this community?
Well, first of all, this was an amazing, extraordinary story, the kind of story that frankly could be its own feature film. It's so dramatic, and I'll just give it away. It has a happy ending because the team goes on to win their second championship, and on the way to their last game, they tape a suicide prevention message that they show at the game, and it goes viral, and it just sort of takes off from there. But it's also a very powerful and sad story. The numbers are relatively small, but the rates are very high in Native American communities. I can't remember the exact number, but several times higher than some other communities. This whole drama was unfolding at a time when there was a contagion, a suicide contagion happening on this relatively small reservation in Montana called the Flathead Reservation. And at the end of the day, there were 20 deaths. And Greg Whitesell, the young man we profile, was the co-captain of the team. He had a number of concussions, which can also be a risk factor. He knew a number of people who had died by suicide and was himself thinking of ending his own life. One of the things we learn in the film is, where young people are concerned, often, not always, but often the parents don't really know what's going on. It's the peers, it's the friends. His friends got a text that scared them, and they drove across the reservation at night and basically saved him. And that's a very telling story, I think, about community and how important community is in helping people and keeping them alive.
Marilyn Rodriguez, is this a story that's relatable in the Latinx community as well? I mean, are you seeing similar factors? And again, we kind of talked about this, like the climate here, the political climate, the racial climate that we see. Is this what you're seeing as well?
Yes, definitely. And one of the things that also really resonates, which was also highlighted in the film, is just the importance that in practicing suicide prevention, we need to address widespread generational trauma and forms of systemic violence and oppression, right, that are very unique to each community and within the Latinx community, right? Not only do the risk factors include language barriers, but it's worrying about family back home, not being able to see family, having an experience of family separation, the lack of information on healthcare. It's important to understand that suicide prevention is not just accessing a suicide hotline, it's also healthcare. Right? Healthcare is suicide prevention, housing is suicide prevention, food security is suicide prevention, and access to mental health care is also suicide prevention.
Dr. Barakat, I mean, this is a topic we could spend days or weeks talking about, but in a very basic sense, what is the treatment, be it talk, be it medical, that gets folks from that acute state that we mentioned earlier, and helps them recover? Because when you're in that state, I'm sure that you have no concept that that one day you're going to want to live and not think about taking your own life?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That is a very complex question, but when we're thinking about prevention, suicide prevention, the first step is, as we've discussed already, is identifying those that are at risk. And we just spent some time talking about and really acknowledging how some communities can be at higher risk because of the community risk factors, whether it be exposure to discrimination, exposure to community violence, and things like that. So part of it is including tools in the front end that's assessing that, which is the social determinants of health, and how that plays a role, and addressing those needs on the front end. And then once they get engaged in treatment, really developing their coping strategies, developing their skills, and using therapeutic techniques. And it's going to be, the treatment is going to look different for each person depending on what they need. Some might need more psychiatric treatment, where others will need to develop more coping strategies and really develop connections to their community and identifying their risk factors and addressing these risk factors. So the treatment can look different for a person, but the first step is really talking about it, acknowledging the risk factors, and really assessing people and getting them the help that they need.
All right, and again, we've talked about this many times. Part of getting the help, maybe the most important part of the beginning, is reaching out to someone in one of your social connections. And this next clip we're going to look at takes a look at that.
I was already kind of in a bad space, you know. I was already going through some things off the field. It was just a really hard time going on in my life. Lonely. Really lonely. When you're depressed, man, the only thing you can think about is yourself, and the only thing you can think about is, you know, what's killing you and what's eating you up inside. And, you know, I did have a lot of people there for me, but I was just pushing them away, you know, not even giving them a chance.
But in the end, Greg pulled through. His text reached 2 close friends and teammates.
You know, 2 seconds after I sent that text, it felt like my 2 friends were right there, you know. It's crazy to think about, because I know I wouldn't be here if they didn't come through, and if they didn't knock on my door.
One of his rescuers was Darshan Bolan.
Yeah, like imagine just like driving up here by yourself and being able to look over that. Have you came up here by yourself before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple times. I don't think we lost the game.
Well, peer-to-peer communication can play a really important role in youth mental health and suicide prevention, because among youth who are experiencing suicidal thoughts, about half of them are not telling anyone. Among those who do, 2/3 of them are only telling a peer. They have a gut feeling about it. Their friends are telling them about the hard stuff going on in their life.
Often, friends are concerned, but unsure how to help.
Should we set the table outside?
Yeah, what do you need out there? Come on.
Fortunately, Greg's friends knew they needed to reach him fast. Later, his mother took him to the emergency room.
Oh, putting your paw over.
He began therapy, ending his suicidal crisis. And so, unlike some 20 others in his community that year, Greg didn't take his life.
That's my back door.
Remember that last week I threw it way up there and it landed up in the tree there?
Yes. Woohoo! That's mine, sir. Let go. Let go. I'll make yours, you make mine.
Okay. No. That's good.
Pretty good.
In my head, I was only worried about myself, but my mom would be living the rest of her life without me. You know, my pain would just be ending, but everybody else's around me would just be starting. If you're thinking about killing yourself, just know that you're loved, know that you're cared for. Today might be hard, but tomorrow's a new day. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow.
So this is Greg, who, Michael, you mentioned is very active now at the reservation in Montana that had seen those 20 suicides. Dr. Joe, so again, you talk about how you focus, you're looking a lot at younger Black males You heard the person in this clip talk about how for the younger folks, half of them are reaching out to someone and it's usually a friend. Is that what you're seeing in the Black community too? Like, will a younger Black male reach out to a friend, a pal, before a family member?
I think youth will reach out to their peers, as Dr. Mudier summarized. You know, there was two young people in Atlanta who created a little app, and all the app says, "I am not okay," and that's what his texts were saying. I'm not okay, and the app will then send text messages to 5 people who they feel, you know, value them. And so the idea of being able to communicate to someone who you trust or someone who you feel that you can share this with, and that might not feel that they might, you know, shame you or feel the stigma, matters. And I just thought it was just a powerful thing. And I love this little app. Just text someone who says, "I'm not okay." That's all you have to say sometimes, and then see what happens. And he said people took it seriously and they showed up. And that potentially saved his life. So for young Black males, for 2 Black youth who created this app, I know it matters to get that, to be able to send that sort of communication.
How many lives is that app going to save? Dr. Barakat, how important is peer-to-peer relationships, especially for young people struggling with suicide ideation?
Oh, it's extremely important. It's part of that need for sense of belonging and connection to others, which is a protective factor of those who are at risk. So developing those relationships are extremely important. You need some sort of outlet. If that increases the likelihood of you asking for help, that's excellent. That's one of those protective factors we really want to build in.
And you know, Greg, he says something so interesting. He said, "If I die, my pain ends, but the pain of everyone around me begins." It seems to me, as a novice, that this is a key factor here. When someone realizes that they are loved, that they're needed, that there are a lot of other folks that depend on them and want them around. Is that kind of like a light bulb that goes off in someone's head, that when they realize, wait a second, the impact on the other people around me, the people that I love, is this like a big factor in perhaps getting over that acute stage? And I'll throw that to anybody.
I do feel, just looking at the literature and what we've done over time, for Black Americans, I think for those, again, the rates have always been low, but it's been increasing, particularly among the younger generation. I do think that's been a protective factor, that the fact they might be concerned that the pain, their death might cause others, or just like parents who would say, "Well, I'm living for my children." So again, we find reasons for getting through the crisis. I'm all for it. It doesn't solve everything, but just let it help you get through the crisis.
Right.
And the opposite of that, you know, the people who are really at risk and really thinking about suicide may be convinced that, you know, no one will miss them. This is a common thing. The experts on the panel will know way more about this than I do. But Fonda talks, that's part of the Fonda story as well. You know, she really believed that her son would be better off without her. And so I think that just shows you how realizing that, in fact, people depend on you and love you, that's powerful stuff that can really make a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and specifically, you know, particularly for the Latinx community and the stigma around mental health, just, you know, knowing that thoughts of suicide, hopelessness, and self-harm, they're common, right? Within the Latinx community, it's so hard to talk about your emotions, you know, given the machismo culture and just so many experiences in general. And so part of destigmatizing mental health is acknowledging that despair is a normal and a valid and understandable response to living in a destabilizing world that can be filled with suffering and challenging experiences.
Dr. Barakat, I think I saw you might want to get in here too.
Yeah, I mean, when we're looking at all these pieces, it's important to understand that that when we're working with patients, and I mentioned developing a safety plan, essentially it's a tool that patients can always reference and develop a habit of going through a process of checking, who can I call? Who can I connect with? So as a clinician, you're working with patients to develop relationships in their lives, identify people they can call, whether it be professionals, whether it be friends, and even developing stronger connections to the community, whether it be their school, whether it be different community programs or social institutions. So really having the stronger connection throughout their community and with people around them.
All right. Well, this hour's flown by, and I think this is a good spot to leave this discussion on, but I just want to thank everyone so much for their expertise. You all just have such a wonderful point of view on this, and it's so illuminating, you know, the things that we've talked about in this last hour. So I want to just heartfelt thank you so much. And again, that's Marilyn Rodriguez, Dr. Sean Joe, Dr. Munther Barakat, and Michael Rosenfeld, executive producer at Minnesota Twin Cities Public Television. So thank you so much. And I want to remind our viewers, first of all, thank you to those tuning into this. And Facing Suicide, the film that we talked about, will premiere on all WTTW platforms tomorrow. That's Tuesday, September 13th, 9 p.m. And of course, if you or someone you know are in crisis or experiencing thoughts of suicide, 988 is now active across the United States. This new shorter phone number will make it easier for people to remember and access mental health services. And please note the previous 1-800-273-TALK number will continue to function, but there's the new 988 number that's gone into effect. So please call 988, and there are folks that are there 24/7. And finally, to learn more about upcoming WTTW events, please visit WTTW.com/events. Again, heartfelt thanks to all of you. Enjoy your Monday, enjoy your week, and until next time, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.